8 weeks in the hospital for a heart attack, my son never visited once. Discharged with $52 in my pocket, no one to pick me up. I sat outside the hospital for 3 hours, watching families embrace and leave, while all I had was a blunt text message. "Take a cab yourself." When I thought I was completely alone, a stranger sat down next to me. 30 years ago, you gave me $300 for college textbooks. Now I'm a lawyer. Before I could understand what was happening, he said something that made my blood run cold. And in that moment, I understood the truth. I didn't react. I just stayed silent and began making my plan. I'm truly grateful you're here. Before we continue, take a moment to share where you're watching from. It's always meaningful to see how stories connect across places. This narrative includes elements shaped for reflection and storytelling. Any similarities may simply be coincidence, but perhaps the emotions and questions it raises are worth thinking about. The morning they discharged me from Providence Hospital, I had $52 in my wallet, a prescription I couldn't afford to fill, and a son who wouldn't answer his phone. I stood outside the cardiac ward entrance with my plastic hospital bag in one hand and my cell phone in the other, watching the automatic doors slide open and shut as families came and went. It was mid-October in Portland, and the air had that crisp edge to it, the kind that makes you want to pull your jacket a little tighter. Except I didn't have a jacket, just the same flannel shirt and jeans I'd worn the day the ambulance brought me in 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks, 60 days of fluorescent lights beeping monitors and nurses who knew my name better than my own kid did. I tried calling David again. 5th time that morning. The phone rang 4 times, then clicked over to voicemail. "Hey, this is David Morrison with Cascade Realty. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." I didn't leave another message. I'd already left 2. My thumb hovered over his contact photo, a picture from 5 years ago, back when he still smiled at family dinners. Back when Catherine was still alive. I stared at that photo for a long moment, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. Maybe he was just busy. Maybe he was stuck in traffic. Maybe he forgot what time they were discharging me. But even as I told myself those things, I knew they weren't true. I sat down on the wooden bench outside the cardiac ward and counted the money in my wallet again. $52, 2 20s a 10, and 2 1s. The nurse had told me the Uber ride home would cost around $40, maybe more, depending on traffic. Home was 22 miles away, out past the city limits, where the houses had yards and the streets still had names instead of numbers. I did the math. If the ride cost $40, I'd have $12 left. Not enough for groceries, not enough for the prescription, not enough for much of anything. My phone buzzed. A text message. "David, get an Uber. I'll pay you back." I read it 3 times. "No, sorry, Dad. No, are you okay?" Just 5 words and a period. I typed back, "I don't have enough cash. Can you come get me?" The reply came fast. "David, busy today. Use a credit card." I didn't have a credit card. Not anymore. I'd cut them up 2 years ago when Catherine got sick after the medical bills started piling up, and I realized I'd never be able to pay them off if I kept charging things I couldn't afford. I didn't text him back. What was the point? I sat there on that bench for 3 hours. I watched a man in his 30s push his elderly father out in a wheelchair, both of them laughing about something. I watched a woman help her mother into a sedan, carefully buckling her seatbelt like she was precious cargo. I watched a young couple leave with their newborn, the father, carrying the car seat like it was made of glass. And I sat there alone with $52 and a phone that wouldn't ring. The October sun climbed higher, but it didn't warm me much. A breeze picked up scattering yellow leaves across the parking lot. I thought about Catherine. If she were here, she would have driven up in that old Chevy pickup windows, down country music playing on the radio. She would have hugged me right there in front of everyone and told me she was proud of me for fighting so hard to get better. But Catherine wasn't here. She'd been gone 9 years, and some days it felt like 90. I thought about the day she died, how David had been there at the hospital, holding her hand crying like his heart was breaking. He'd told me he'd take care of me, that I wouldn't have to worry about anything. That family came first. I'd believed him. Maybe that was my mistake. I pulled out my phone one more time and stared at David's last message. Busy today. Busy. My son was busy. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to call him back and ask him what the hell was so important that he couldn't pick up his own father from the hospital. But I couldn't muster the anger. All I felt was tired. Tired and small and foolish for believing he'd actually show up. Maybe I'd been naive. Maybe I'd put too much faith in him. But he was my son. What else was I supposed to do? A young nurse walked past pushing an empty wheelchair. She glanced at me, then stopped. "Mr. Morrison, are you okay? Do you need help?" I shook my head. No, thank you. I'm just waiting for my ride. She smiled gently. Okay, stay warm out here. She walked back inside, and I was alone again. I looked down at my phone. The battery was at 12%. I hadn't thought to charge it before they discharged me. Another thing I'd forgotten. I was still staring at my phone when a shadow fell across the bench. Mr. Morrison. I looked up. A man stood in front of me, maybe late 40s, wearing a gray jacket and jeans. He had kind eyes and a face I didn't recognize, but there was something familiar about him. Something in the way he stood, like he was waiting for permission to speak. I'm sorry, I said. Do I know you? He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that reaches all the way to the eyes. You might not remember me. It's been a long time. I studied his face, trying to place him. Nothing clicked. I saw you sitting here, he said, glancing at the hospital bag beside me. You just get discharged. I nodded. Yeah, this morning. You waiting for a ride? I hesitated, then nodded again. No point in lying. He sat down on the bench beside me, not too close, just close enough to feel like company. For a minute, neither of us said anything. We just sat there watching the cars come and go. I think I know you, he said finally. You used to have a woodworking shop out on Barlow Road, didn't you? My heart skipped. Yeah, I did. Still do, actually. Or what's left of it. I thought so. He turned to look at me, and there was something in his expression, something grateful and sad all at once. 30 years ago, you gave me a job in that shop when I didn't have anywhere else to go. I stared at him, my mind racing back through the years. 30 years, 1994, 1995. I'd hired a lot of people back then, mostly day laborers' kids who needed work. And then it clicked. The kid who used to sleep in his car, the one I'd let use the shop's bathroom to clean up before work, the one who'd shown up every single day no matter what, because he didn't have anywhere else to be. The one who was always reading books during his lunch break, talking about going to college someday. Thomas. I said the name coming back to me like an old song I hadn't heard in years. He smiled wider. Yeah, my name is Thomas. I blinked, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the 18-year-old kid I remembered. You look good, real good. Thank you, he said. I've done okay for myself. You went to college. I did. Community college first, then Portland State, then law school. Law school. I felt something warm spread through my chest. Thomas, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. He looked down at his hands. I wouldn't have made it without you, Mr. Morrison. You gave me more than a job. You gave me a chance. I shook my head. You did the work. I just gave you a place to do it. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Thomas looked at me, his expression serious. Are you okay, Mr. Morrison? You've been sitting out here a long time. I opened my mouth to say yes, to brush it off, to pretend everything was fine. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. No, I said finally. I'm not okay. Thomas nodded slowly. Your son's not coming, is he? I looked at him, surprised. How did you know? I didn't. But I've been watching you for 20 minutes. You keep checking your phone. You keep looking at the road. And you look alone. I felt something crack inside me. Yeah, he's not coming. Thomas didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he stood up and held out his hand. Come on, he said. Let me give you a ride home. I stared at the man in front of me, Thomas searching his face for the shadow of the 18-year-old kid I'd helped back in 1995. His eyes were the same. That's what I noticed first. Brown, steady, grateful. The kind of eyes that remembered things. The rest of him had changed. His face was fuller now, his shoulders broader, his hair touched with gray at the temples. But those eyes were the same. I can't believe it, I said, my voice catching. Thomas, you were just a kid. I was, he said, and his smile softened. I didn't have much back then. You remember? I nodded. How could I forget he'd been sleeping in his car that summer, parking it behind the hardware store on Barlow Road? One morning, I'd seen him washing up in the gas station bathroom, trying to make himself look presentable. I'd hired him on the spot, paid him cash under the table, let him use the shop's bathroom. And when he told me he'd been accepted to community college but couldn't afford the books, I'd given him $300. I remembered his face when I handed him that money. He'd looked at me like I'd just handed him the world. I remember, I said. You worked hard, never missed a day. You gave me a chance, Thomas said. Nobody else would. And when you gave me that money, he stopped, shook his head. I've never forgotten that, Mr. Morrison. Not once in 30 years. I didn't know what to say. I'd never thought of it as anything special, just a man helping a kid who needed it. Oh, what are you doing here? I asked. At the hospital, I mean. I was visiting a client, he said. She's on the third floor recovering from hip surgery. I saw you sitting out here and I wasn't sure at first. But then I heard the nurse call your name when she came out to check on you. William Morrison. I thought, it can't be the same guy. But I had to find out. You're a lawyer now. I asked, though. I'd already guessed as much from the way he carried himself. Elder law attorney, he said. I specialize in helping folks your age navigate legal issues, estate planning, guardianship, that kind of thing. I've been practicing in Portland for about 10 years now. Portland. He'd stayed. Something about that made my chest tighten. Now that's good, I said. Real good. I'm proud of you, Thomas. He looked down at his hands, and for a second I saw that 18-year-old kid again, the one who didn't know how to accept a compliment. Listen, he said, looking back up at me. I couldn't help but notice you've been sitting out here a while. You need a ride somewhere. I hesitated. Pride is a funny thing. Even when you're sitting on a bench with $52 and nowhere to go, it still whispers in your ear that you shouldn't accept help from a stranger. But Thomas wasn't a stranger. Not really. I'd appreciate that, I said. If it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all, he said, standing up and offering me his hand. Come on, my car's just over there. We walked across the parking lot together, and I felt lighter than I had all morning. Not because of the ride, though, that helped, but because of the company. It's strange how loneliness can press down on you without you even realizing it, and how much lighter you feel when someone sees you, really sees you, and chooses to stay. Thomas's car was a dark blue sedan, clean and practical. He opened the passenger door for me, waited while I climbed in, then shut it gently behind me. When he got in on the driver's side, he turned to me and asked, "Where to?" I gave him the address out past the city limits on Route 9, where the houses sat on 2-acre lots and the neighbors kept horses. He nodded, typed it into his GPS, and pulled out of the parking lot. For a while, we didn't talk. I watched the city roll by outside the window, storefronts, traffic lights, people going about their lives. It felt surreal being out in the world again after 8 weeks in a hospital bed. "So," Thomas said after a few minutes, his tone careful. "How long were you in the hospital?" 8 weeks, I said. Had a heart attack back in September. They kept me in the cardiac unit for a while, then moved me to rehab. And that's a long time, he said. Must have been hard. It was, I admitted. But the doctor said I'm lucky to be alive. Heart attack's no joke. No, it's not. He glanced over at me. You have family nearby? Someone helping you out while you recover? I felt my jaw tighten. I've got a son, David. He lives about 30 minutes from me. That's good, Thomas said. Family's important, especially when you're going through something like this. I didn't answer. I just looked out the window. Thomas must have picked up on it because he didn't press. We drove in silence for a few more miles. My wife passed away 9 years ago, I said eventually. Cancer. She fought it for 2 years, but in the end, I trailed off. Her name was Catherine. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm sorry, Thomas said, and he meant it. I could hear it in his voice. Thank you. I swallowed hard. She would have liked knowing you turned out okay. She always said I had a good instinct for people. Thomas smiled at that. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. We merged onto Route 9, and the landscape started to change. Fewer buildings, more trees. The October sun filtered through the branches, casting long shadows across the road. Your son, Thomas said carefully. He's doing all right. I didn't answer right away. I could feel the lie forming on my tongue. Yeah, he's great, just busy, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. He's got his own life, I said finally. Real estate. He's always busy. Thomas nodded, but I could tell he had heard what I didn't say. We turned onto my street 20 minutes later. The houses out here were older, set back from the road with long driveways and tall trees. I'd lived here for 35 years, raised David in this house, buried Catherine's ashes in the garden out back. But as Thomas pulled into my driveway, I felt my stomach drop. The house was dark. Every window, every room. No lights, no sign of life. The lawn was overgrown, the grass reaching halfway up the porch steps. The mailbox at the end of the driveway was overflowing envelopes and flyers spilling out onto the ground. A recycling bin had tipped over, and newspapers were scattered across the driveway, some of them soaked from rain. Thomas stopped the car in the driveway and turned off the engine. Neither of us moved. Mr. Morrison, he said quietly. How long did you say you were in the hospital? 8 weeks, I said, my voice hollow. He didn't ask the next question. He didn't have to. Because we both knew. My son hadn't come to pick me up, and he hadn't come here either. Not once in 8 weeks. I sat there in the passenger seat staring at my dark, abandoned house and felt something inside me crack. Thomas didn't say anything. He just sat there with me, hands on the steering wheel, giving me the space to feel whatever I needed to feel. And for the first time that day, I was grateful I wasn't alone. Thomas and I stepped into the dark house together, and the smell hit me immediately: rotting food, stale air, abandonment. I fumbled for the light switch by the door. Nothing. I flipped it up and down a few times, but the house stayed dark. "Power's off," I said, my voice flat. Thomas pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the front hallway. Dust hung in the air like fog. The hardwood floors were covered in a thin layer of grit, and the walls Catherine and I had painted a soft cream color 20 years ago looked gray in the dim light. We moved through the living room. The couch was still there, the coffee table, the bookshelf full of Catherine's novels. But everything felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. In the kitchen, the smell got worse. I opened the refrigerator, and the stench made me step back. Spoiled milk, rotting vegetables, something unidentifiable in a Tupperware container. I shut the door quickly. "The power's been off a while," Thomas said quietly. "At least a few weeks." I nodded, unable to speak. 8 weeks. The power had been off for 8 weeks. On the kitchen counter, mail was piled high: envelopes, flyers, catalogs. Some of it had fallen onto the floor. I picked up a few pieces: bills, more bills. A notice from the water company. A reminder from the pharmacy. I set them down and walked toward the back of the house, toward the door that led to the workshop, Catherine's workshop. I'd built it for her 30 years ago, back when she'd taken up woodworking as a hobby. She'd loved it: the smell of sawdust, the feel of smooth wood under her hands, the satisfaction of creating something from nothing. After she passed, I'd taken over the space. It was the only place in the house where I still felt close to her. I reached for the doorknob. It didn't turn. I tried again, jiggling it, but it was locked. I looked closer. The lock was new, a shiny brass deadbolt I didn't recognize. "Thomas," I said, my voice shaking, "the workshop's locked." He came over, shone his phone light on the lock. "Did you put this here?" "No." I pulled at the door, rattling the handle. "I never locked this door, not once in 30 years. Thomas didn't say anything. He just stood there, his face unreadable. I leaned my forehead against the door and felt something inside me collapse. My mind drifted back to a summer day in 1995. I'd been outside the hardware store on Barlow Road loading 2x4s into the back of my truck when I saw him, a kid maybe 18 sitting on the curb with his head in his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His jeans were torn at the knees, his t-shirt faded and too big, and his sneakers were held together with duct tape. I finished loading the truck and walked over to him. "You all right, son?" He looked up at me, startled. His eyes were red, and there was a bruise on his cheek I hadn't noticed from a distance. "Yeah," he said quickly, standing up. "Yeah, I'm fine." He wasn't fine, I could see that, but I didn't push. "You looking for work?" I asked. He blinked. "What work?" I said. "I've got a woodworking shop out on Route 9. I could use some help this summer. You interested?" He stared at me like I'd just offered him a winning lottery ticket. Yeah, he said. "Yeah, I'm interested. Though, can you start today?" "Yes, sir." I nodded. "All right, hop in the truck." His name was Thomas Bennett. He was 18 years old, fresh out of high school, and homeless. He'd been sleeping in his car for 3 weeks, parking behind the hardware store at night, and washing up in the gas station bathroom every morning. I didn't ask him why. I figured if he wanted to tell me, he would. He worked in the shop 6 days a week that summer. He showed up on time every single day, did whatever I asked him to do, and never complained. He sanded wood until his hands blistered, swept sawdust until the floor gleamed, and learned to use every tool in the shop like he'd been born holding them. Catherine took to him immediately. Every day around noon, she'd walk out to the shop with a tray of food, sandwiches, soup, homemade cookies, iced tea in the summer heat. She'd set it down on the workbench and say, "You boys need to eat." Thomas always looked at her like she was an angel. "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison." He'd say, his voice quiet and respectful. "You're welcome, honey," she'd say, ruffling his hair like he was one of our own. And in a way he was. One afternoon in late August, Thomas came into the shop waving a letter. His face was lit up like a Christmas tree. "I got in," he said, breathless. "I got into community college." I set down the piece of oak I'd been sanding and shook his hand. "That's great, Thomas. I'm proud of you." His smile faltered. "I don't know if I can go, though. I don't have money for books or supplies, and I'm going to need to find a place to live closer to campus, and I don't know how I'm going to—" "Hold on," I said. holding up a hand. I walked over to my toolbox, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out an envelope I'd been saving. Inside was $300 in cash money I'd been setting aside all summer. I handed it to him. For books. He stared at the envelope like it was going to disappear. "Mr. Morrison, I can't—" "Yes, you can." "But I haven't earned—" "You earned every penny of this," I said firmly. "You worked hard all summer. You showed up every day. You didn't quit when it got tough. That's worth something, Thomas. You're worth something." His eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink them back, but they spilled over anyway. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't know how to thank you." I clapped him on the shoulder. "Go make something of yourself, kid. That's all the thanks I need." He left for college a week later. Catherine packed him a care package, cookies, granola bars, a thermos for coffee. She hugged him like he was her own son and made him promise to visit. He did visit, once, maybe twice in the first year. Then life got busy and we lost touch. But I never forgot him, and I guess he never forgot me either. Thomas's voice brought me back to the present. "Mr. Morrison." I lifted my head from the workshop door and turned around. Thomas was standing by the kitchen counter, holding a piece of mail. "What is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "You need to see this." I walked over. He handed me an envelope. The return address said, Pacific Northwest Property Appraisals, LLC. I opened it. Inside was a letter dated 3 weeks after I'd been admitted to the hospital. "Dear Mr. Morrison, this letter confirms the completion of the residential property appraisal requested by your authorized representative on September 28th. The full report has been sent to the requesting party as per their instructions. Estimated property value $650,000. If you have any questions, please contact our office." I read it twice. Then I looked up at Thomas. "I didn't request this," I said. "I know." "Who did?" Thomas pointed to the line that said authorized representative. "Someone with legal authority to act on your behalf," he said. "Someone who wanted to know how much your house and property are worth." The room felt like it was tilting. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. 3 weeks after I went into the hospital, I said slowly, "someone ordered an appraisal of my house." Thomas nodded. "And locked you out of your workshop, and let the power get shut off." I looked at him, and I could see the anger in his eyes, not at me, but for me. "I need to stay here tonight," Thomas said. "I need to see all your paperwork, bank statements, legal documents, anything you've signed in the last few months. Can you find those for me?" I nodded numbly. "Good," he said, "because I think someone's trying to take everything you have." And deep down, I knew exactly who that someone was. Thomas refused to leave that first night, not because he thought I couldn't handle myself, but because something in that property appraisal letter had triggered his lawyer instincts. "I've seen this before," he'd said, sitting at my kitchen table with a stack of unopened mail in front of him. "Someone orders an appraisal right after a medical emergency. It's usually step one in a bigger plan." I didn't want to believe him, but I also couldn't ignore the locked workshop, the shut-off power, the overflowing mailbox. So I told him he could stay. He slept on the couch that night. I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle around me. Every sound felt wrong. The refrigerator humming back to life. The furnace kicking on for the first time in weeks. Even the silence between those sounds felt heavy, oppressive. I kept thinking about David. About the way he hadn't answered my calls, about that text message, "busy today." What kind of busy keeps you from picking up your own father from the hospital? By morning, the power was back on. Thomas had called the utility company at 7 a.m., explained the situation, and paid the reconnection fee with his own credit card. "You can pay me back later," he said when I tried to protest. "Right now, we need lights." We spent the morning cleaning. Thomas helped me haul the spoiled food out of the fridge, wipe down the counters, and sweep the floors. The smell of decay had settled into everything, the curtains, the furniture, even the walls. We opened every window in the house despite the October chill, letting the cold air chase out the stench. It felt good to move, to do something with my hands. It kept my mind from spiraling. Around 9 o'clock, Thomas sat down at the kitchen table with a box of documents I'd pulled from the hall closet. Bank statements, insurance papers, medical bills. Legal documents I'd signed over the years without thinking much about them. He worked in silence for a while, flipping through pages, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. I busied myself washing dishes, but I kept glancing over my shoulder watching him. His expression grew darker with each page he turned. Finally, he stopped. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and stared at it for a long moment. His jaw tightened. "Mr. Morrison," he said quietly. When did you sign this? I dried my hands and walked over. He handed me the paper. At the top in bold letters it said, "Durable Power of Attorney." My stomach dropped. I scanned the document. It was dated September 13th, 3 days after my heart attack. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting that looked nothing like mine, was my signature. I don't remember signing this, I said, my voice hollow. You were in the hospital 3 days after your heart attack, Thomas said carefully. Where were you? ICU, regular room? ICU, I said. I was on morphine. I stopped the memory coming back in fragments. I was barely awake. I kept drifting in and out. Thomas nodded, his jaw tight. Do you remember your son visiting you? I closed my eyes, trying to pull the memory into focus. I saw flashes. David standing by my bedside, his face blurry, holding a clipboard, his voice distant and muffled. You need to sign this, Dad. It's just to help me take care of things while you're in here. Just a formality. Don't worry about it. I'd signed it. I remembered the pen in my hand, the way it felt too heavy, the way my signature came out crooked and weak. I remembered David's hand on my shoulder, steadying me. I remembered thinking how good it was that he was there taking care of things. He said it was to help, I whispered. He said it was just so he could pay my bills while I was recovering. Thomas's expression darkened. This isn't just for paying bills, Mr. Morrison. This is a durable power of attorney. It gives your son legal authority over your finances, your property, your medical decisions, everything. And it doesn't expire when you leave the hospital. It stays in effect unless you revoke it. I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. I didn't know. I thought he was just helping. He knew you didn't understand, Thomas said, his voice hard. You were on morphine, barely conscious. A signature obtained under those conditions isn't legally valid. He took advantage of you when you were at your most vulnerable. I felt like the floor was dropping out from under me. My own son had done this to me. He can't do that, I said weakly. Can he? Thomas picked up the document and held it up to the light, examining it. Legally, a person must have mental capacity to sign a power of attorney. If you were under the influence of medication that impaired your judgment, the document is voidable. But proving that in court, that's harder. It becomes your word against his. But you believe me? I said. Thomas set the paper down and looked me straight in the eye. I believe you, and I believe we can fight this. But you need to understand your son has had legal control over your assets for 2 months. We need to find out what he's done with that control. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. David. My hand hovered over the phone. Thomas watched me waiting. I answered. Hello? Dad. David's voice was tight-clipped. Why is the power back on at the house? I blinked. What? The power? I got an alert from the utility company that someone paid the reconnection fee. Was that you? Yes, I'm home. I got discharged yesterday. Silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. You're home, David said finally, and there was something in his voice I couldn't quite place. Surprise, anger. Fear. Why didn't you call me? I felt a flicker of anger. I did call you 5 times. You didn't answer. I was busy, Dad. I told you to take an Uber. I didn't have enough money. You could have used a credit card. I don't have a credit card. Another silence. Then, well, you're home now. That's good. Listen, I need to come by and talk to you about a few things. There are some papers you need to sign. Why is the workshop locked? I interrupted. He hesitated. What? The workshop. Someone put a new lock on the door. Was that you? Dad, Jessica thought it wasn't safe for you to be working with power tools right after a heart attack. We were just trying to protect you. Protect me! My voice rose. You locked me out of my own workshop. Dad, calm down. You're getting worked up. This isn't good for your heart. They don't tell me to calm down. You had no right. Thomas reached over and gently took the phone from my hand. I stared at him, too stunned to protest. He put the phone to his ear. Hello, David. My name is Thomas Bennett. I'm an elder law attorney and I'm representing your father. I heard David's voice on the other end, sharp and defensive. Who the hell are you? Put my father back on the phone. Your father asked me to review his legal documents, Thomas said calmly. Including the power of attorney you had him sign while he was on morphine in the ICU. Silence. That document was signed under duress, Thomas continued. Your father was not mentally competent to sign legal paperwork at that time. I'll be filing a motion to revoke it. You don't know what you're talking about, David snapped. My father needed help. I was helping him. By ordering a property appraisal without his knowledge, by locking him out of his workshop, by shutting off his utilities, Susks. I don't have to listen to this. David's voice was shaking, now panicked. This is between me and my father. Stay out of it. If you come near this property or attempt to use that fraudulent power of attorney again, Thomas said, his voice cold and measured, I will file a report with Adult Protective Services and the district attorney's office. Do you understand me? The line went dead. Thomas set the phone down on the table. He looked at me, his expression grim. I think your son is trying to steal your property, he said quietly, and I think he's been planning this for months. I sat down heavily in the kitchen chair, my chest tight, my hands trembling. I thought about the locked workshop, the shut-off power, the property appraisal, the power of attorney signed while I was barely conscious. Because I knew deep down that Thomas was right. Thomas hadn't become successful by trusting explanations. He'd become successful by following the money. The morning after David hung up on him, Thomas made 2 phone calls. The first was to a guy named Jake Reynolds, a private investigator Thomas had worked with on half a dozen elder abuse cases. Jake was in his late 40s, a former Portland police detective who'd left the force to start his own firm specializing in financial fraud. If there was a paper trail, Jake would find it. The second call was to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a forensic pharmacologist who consulted with law enforcement on medication tampering cases. Thomas had used her expertise before when a client's prescribed painkillers turned out to be something else entirely. I need you to look at some pills, Thomas told her. Blood pressure medication. I think they might not be what the label says. Bring them by tomorrow, she said. I'll run a full analysis. Thomas hung up and turned to me. We're going to find out exactly what your son's been doing, but I need you to trust the process, okay? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could handle what we might find. Jake got to work immediately. Thomas gave him copies of the power of attorney, the property appraisal, and my bank statements for the last 6 months. 3 days later, on a gray Thursday afternoon, Jake showed up at my door with a folder thick enough to make my stomach turn. We sat at the kitchen table, me, Thomas, and Jake, while Jake laid out what he'd found. Your son used that power of attorney to take out a mortgage on this property, Jake said, tapping a stack of papers. September 28th, 3 weeks after you were admitted to the hospital. I stared at the document. There it was, in black and white. A loan for $200,000 secured against my house and workshop. My signature, or something that looked like my signature, was at the bottom. I didn't sign this, I said, my voice shaking. I know, Jake said. He forged it, or he brought it to you in the hospital and had you sign it while you were on morphine. Either way, it's fraud. Why? I asked. Why would he need $200,000? Jake flipped to another page. Your son's in debt, deep debt, about $500,000, give or take. I felt like the room was tilting. $500,000, I repeated. Jake nodded. He had a commercial real estate deal fall apart 2 years ago. He borrowed money from investors, promised big returns, and the whole thing went south. He's been scrambling to pay it back ever since. The $200,000 he pulled from your property that went straight to paying down part of that debt. I couldn't breathe. He mortgaged Catherine's workshop to pay off his debts. Thomas reached over and put a hand on my shoulder. I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison. I just sat there staring at the papers, trying to make sense of it. My son, my own son, had stolen from me, had used my illness, my trust, to take the one thing I had left of my wife. There's more, Jake said quietly. I looked up at him, and I could see from his expression that whatever came next was going to be worse. Jake pulled out his phone and opened up a social media page. It was Jessica's account, my daughter-in-law's influencer page, the one she was always posting on. Your daughter-in-law has quite a following, Jake said. 50,000 followers. She posts about lifestyle, fashion, travel, and she's been posting a lot about you. He scrolled through the posts. I saw photos of Jessica at the hospital, 2 photos both from the same day, both taken in the lobby, not in my room. The captions were full of heart emojis and prayers. Praying for my father-in-law's recovery. Family is everything. So grateful Dad is getting stronger. We love you. She only visited you twice in 8 weeks, Jake said. And both times she stayed less than 15 minutes. But based on these posts, you'd think she was there every day. I felt sick. Jake kept scrolling. More posts. Jessica in Paris. Jessica with shopping bags from designer stores. Jessica at expensive restaurants. In the last 2 months, Jake said, your daughter-in-law has spent over $50,000, most of it on travel clothes and dining out. The timing lines up with when your son mortgaged your property. I closed my eyes. It wasn't just David, it was both of them. They're living off my house, I said quietly. Yes, Thomas said, they are. That evening, Thomas asked me a question I wasn't expecting. Mr. Morrison, when was the last time you refilled your blood pressure medication? I blinked, confused by the sudden change in topic. I don't know. A few months ago, maybe. Who picked it up for you? David did, I said. I asked him to grab it from the pharmacy back in June. Why? Thomas's expression darkened. Where are the pills now? In the bathroom. Why, what's going on? Thomas stood up and walked down the hall. I followed him. He opened the medicine cabinet, found the orange prescription bottle, and held it up to the light. How many of these have you taken since June? He asked. Every day, I said. 1 in the morning, 1 at night, like the doctor told me. Thomas unscrewed the cap and poured a few pills into his palm. He stared at them for a long moment, then looked at me. I need to have these tested, he said. Tested, I repeated. Why, they're just blood pressure pills. Maybe, Thomas said, but I need to be sure. The next day, Thomas took the pills to Dr. Rodriguez's lab. I spent the afternoon pacing the house, trying not to think about what any of this meant. David had stolen from me. Jessica had lied about caring for me. They'd mortgaged Catherine's workshop. They'd used me. But the pills, I didn't understand why Thomas was so concerned about the pills. I got my answer 2 days later. Dr. Rodriguez called Thomas's cell phone. He put it on speaker so I could hear. Thomas, she said, her voice tight. I ran a full analysis on those pills. They're not blood pressure medication. Thomas's jaw clenched. What are they? Sugar pills, she said. Placebos. No active ingredients. Whoever gave these to your client wasn't trying to help him. They were trying to make sure his condition got worse. I felt the room spin. I grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. Sugar pills, I whispered. Yes, Dr. Rodriguez said. If someone with high blood pressure stops taking their real medication and replaces it with placebos, their condition deteriorates rapidly. Within weeks, they could be at serious risk for a stroke or heart attack. I thought back to June. David had picked up my pills. 3 months later, I'd had a heart attack. Oh my God, I said, my voice breaking. He tried to... Thomas ended the call and turned to me, his face grim. Your son didn't just steal from you, he said quietly. He tried to harm you, and I think he's been planning this for a very long time. I held that pill bottle for a long time, after Thomas told me, turning it over and over in my hands, trying to understand how my son could have done this. The orange prescription bottle felt heavier than it should have, like it was filled with something more than sugar pills. Betrayal, maybe, premeditation, intent. I couldn't stop thinking about June. David had offered to pick up my medication refill. I'd thought it was kind of him, thoughtful even. I'd been having trouble driving long distances after a dizzy spell, and he'd said, "Don't worry, Dad, I'll grab it for you." I'd trusted him. The lab report came back 2 days later. Dr. Rodriguez sent it directly to Thomas, who sat me down at the kitchen table and walked me through it. No active ingredients, Thomas said, pointing to a line on the report. These pills are made of compressed glucose, sugar, that's it. No blood pressure medication. Nothing that would help your condition. You've been taking placebos for 3 months. I stared at the words on the page, but they didn't make sense. Or maybe they made too much sense, and I just didn't want to believe it. 3 months, I repeated. I had the heart attack in September. Exactly, Thomas said. If someone with uncontrolled high blood pressure stops taking their medication, their condition deteriorates fast. Within weeks, the risk of stroke or heart attack skyrockets. Oh, I felt cold all over. He knew, I whispered. He knew what would happen. Thomas didn't answer. He didn't need to. Jake Reynolds showed up that afternoon with more evidence. He set his laptop on the kitchen table and pulled up a grainy black and white video. This is security footage from the pharmacy, Jake said. June 14th, your son came in to pick up your prescription. I watched the screen. There was David walking up to the pharmacy counter, handing over a slip of paper. The pharmacist disappeared into the back, then returned with a small paper bag. David took it, thanked her, and walked out. The pharmacy confirmed they filled the prescription, Jake said. The real medication, 30 days worth. The pharmacist remembers your son because he asked a lot of questions about dosage and side effects. So he picked up the real pills, I said slowly. But I was taking fake ones. Right, Jake said, which means he swapped them out before he gave them to you. I felt sick. But where did he get the fake pills? I asked. Jake clicked to another window on his laptop. It was a screenshot of an online order Amazon. Your son has an Amazon account, Jake said. I pulled his order history. 4 months before your heart attack, he ordered a product called Dietary Wellness Tablets. They're marketed as a generic supplement, but look at the description. He zoomed in. The pills in the photo were small, round, and white, exactly like my blood pressure medication. They're designed to look like prescription pills, Jake said. Same size, same color, same shape. People use them for all kinds of things, pranks, theater props, placebo experiments. But in this case, he trailed off. In this case, Thomas finished, your son used them to replace your real medication. I looked at the order details. Ordered February 10th, 2024, shipped to David's address, 4 months before my heart attack. He planned this, I said, my voice hollow. 4 months in advance. Yes, Thomas said. This wasn't impulsive. It was premeditated. I thought back to those months, June, July, August. I'd felt off. I remembered complaining about headaches, dizziness. I'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling like my heart was racing, like I couldn't catch my breath. I'd chalked it up to getting older, to stress, to grief. Even Catherine had been gone 9 years, but some days the weight of her absence still hit me like a freight train. But it hadn't been grief. It had been my blood pressure spiking higher and higher because I wasn't taking the medication I thought I was. I'd ignored the signs, and David had counted on that. I should have known, I said quietly. Thomas shook his head. You trusted your son? That's not a failing Mr. Morrison. That's what parents do. He used that against me. Yes, Thomas said. He did. That night, Thomas and I sat in the living room, the house dark except for a single lamp in the corner. I felt exhausted not just physically, but in a way that went bone deep. Like something fundamental inside me had cracked. This is a criminal offense, Thomas said. What your son did replacing your medication with placebos, that's reckless endangerment at minimum. Depending on how the prosecutor sees it, it could be considered attempted manslaughter, maybe more. He attempted manslaughter, I repeated. The words felt foreign in my mouth. He put you in a situation where your life was at serious risk, Thomas said. And the evidence suggests he did it intentionally. That's a crime, Mr. Morrison, a serious one. I nodded slowly. What happens now? That's up to you, Thomas said. We can take this to the district attorney's office. They'll open a criminal investigation. If they find enough evidence, and I think they will, they'll file charges. Your son could face jail time. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. Or, Thomas continued, we can handle this civilly. Sue for damages, get the POA revoked, take back control of your property. Keep it out of the criminal system. I thought about it. I thought about David as a little boy riding his bike down this street laughing. I thought about him at Catherine's funeral, standing beside me, his hand on my shoulder. And then I thought about him ordering those pills 4 months in advance, planning my heart attack, locking me out of Catherine's workshop, mortgaging my home. I want to talk to the DA, I said. Thomas nodded. All right, I'll make the call. The next morning, Thomas called the district attorney's office and asked for Rebecca Martinez, a prosecutor he'd worked with on several elder abuse cases. She agreed to meet with us the following Monday. She's good, Thomas told me after he hung up. Tough. She doesn't let people get away with this kind of thing. What will she do? I asked. That she'll review the evidence, Thomas said. The lab report, the pharmacy footage, the Amazon order. If she thinks there's enough to prosecute, she'll open a formal investigation. After that, it's out of our hands. The state takes over. I nodded, trying to process it all. Mr. Morrison. Thomas said, his voice careful. Once we do this, there's no going back. If the DA files charges, your son will be arrested. He'll go to trial. If he's convicted, he could go to prison. Do you understand that? I looked at him. I thought about the pill bottle, the fake medication, the heart attack that had nearly killed me. He tried to kill me, I said quietly. Thomas held my gaze. Yes, I believe he did. I took a breath. Then we go forward. If you're still here, comment, still watching, so I know you're following along. And if you were in this situation, would you confront them right away or stay silent and prepare your next move? Share your thoughts before we continue. And just a quick note, the next part includes some elements shaped for storytelling and reflection. It may not fully reflect real life. If you'd rather not continue, feel free to stop here. I'd been angry before, angry when Catherine died, angry at the unfairness of it all, but nothing could have prepared me for the rage I felt driving to my son's house with evidence that he'd tried to harm me. Thomas sat in the passenger seat, a folder of documents on his lap. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. We both knew what we were about to do. David lived in a neighborhood 20 minutes from mine, in a house he'd bought 3 years ago, with money he'd borrowed from investors. The lawn was perfectly manicured. The driveway had 2 cars, his black SUV and Jessica's white sedan. Everything looked normal, respectable. It was all a lie. I didn't knock. I rang the doorbell and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. Jessica answered. She was wearing yoga pants and a designer sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. When she saw me, her smile faltered. "Dad," she said, recovering quickly. "This is a surprise. We didn't know you were coming." "Where's David?" I asked. "He's in the office. Is everything okay?" I didn't answer. I stepped past her into the house. Thomas followed. David appeared in the hallway, his phone in his hand. When he saw us, his expression shifted from confusion to something colder. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to find the boy I'd raised. The boy who used to help me in the workshop, who'd cried at his mother's funeral. I couldn't see him anymore. "You switched my medication," I said. His face went blank. "What?" "My blood pressure pills. You picked them up from the pharmacy in June, but you didn't give me the real medication. You gave me sugar pills." He laughed. Actually laughed. "That's insane. Dad, you're not making sense." "Am I?" I pulled the folder from Thomas's hands and opened it. "This is a lab report. It says the pills I've been taking for 3 months have no active ingredients. They're placebos." David's jaw tightened. "That's a mistake. The pharmacy must have..." "This," I interrupted, pulling out another page, "is security footage from the pharmacy. June 14th. You're right there picking up my prescription. The pharmacist confirmed they gave you the real medication." He stared at the photo. I watched his throat work as he swallowed. "And this," Thomas said, stepping forward, "is a copy of your Amazon order history. February 10th. You ordered something called dietary wellness tablets. Oh, they look exactly like blood pressure medication. They were shipped to this address." David's face went pale. "You hacked my account?" "No," Thomas said calmly. "Your account was subpoenaed as part of a criminal investigation. Everything we're looking at is legal evidence." Jessica, who'd been standing in the doorway, made a strangled sound. "David!" "Don't," he snapped. "But they have the..." "Jessica, stop!" She didn't stop. She turned to me, her face crumpling. "It was me. I ordered them. The replacement pills were cheaper, and I thought it would save us money." "Shut up!" David shouted. I didn't think it would hurt him. Jessica's voice was shaking now, hysterical. "I thought they were just vitamins or something. I didn't know they'd cause a heart attack." Jesus Christ, Jessica. "You told me it was fine," she screamed. "You said it wouldn't matter." The room went silent. Thomas looked at me. I looked at David. "Get out of my house," David said, his voice low and dangerous. "We're leaving," Thomas said. "But you should know this is all going to the district attorney's office. Both of you." David's hands clenched into fists. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said quietly. "I already made my mistake. I trusted you." That evening, Thomas and I met with Rebecca Martinez at the district attorney's office. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened as Thomas laid out everything the power of attorney signed, under duress the fraudulent mortgage, the medication tampering. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "do you understand what you're asking me to do?" "Yes," I said. "If I open a criminal investigation, your son and daughter-in-law will likely be arrested. They will face serious charges: fraud, elder abuse, reckless endangerment, possibly attempted manslaughter. This will be public, it will be ugly, and there's no guarantee of a conviction." "I understand." She nodded slowly. "All right, I'm opening an investigation. I'll need your full medical records, the pharmacy records, and a detailed written statement from you. Can you provide those?" "Yes." "Good. This is going to take time, Mr. Morrison. Weeks, maybe months. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Catherine. I thought about the workshop. I thought about the pills I'd been taking, thinking they were keeping me alive when really they were doing the opposite." "I'm prepared," I said. Late that night, Thomas's phone buzzed. He read the message, then looked up at me. "Your son hired a lawyer," he said. "Gregory Stevens, defense attorney. He's good." "What does that mean?" Thomas handed me his phone. The message was short and direct. "To Thomas Bennett and William Morrison. Be advised that we will be filing an emergency guardianship petition on behalf of David and Jessica Morrison. Mr. William Morrison is clearly suffering from cognitive decline and is being unduly influenced by outside parties. We will seek immediate conservatorship to protect his interests. Gregory Stevens, Esquire." I stared at the message. They're trying to have me declared incompetent. Yes, Thomas said. It's a common tactic. If they can convince a judge that you're not mentally capable of making your own decisions, they can take control of your finances and your medical care. They can shut this whole thing down before it even starts. Can they do that? They can try, Thomas said, but we're going to fight it. I've already called Dr. Mitchell. He's a geriatric psychiatrist. He'll evaluate you, prove you're perfectly competent. We'll go to the hearing, we'll present evidence, and we'll shut this down. I looked at the message again. Cognitive decline, unduly influenced. They're going to say I'm senile, I said quietly. Yes. They're going to say you're manipulating me. Yes. I set the phone down. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from anger. They're playing dirty, Thomas said. Are you ready for this? I thought about my son standing in his perfect house lying to my face. I thought about Jessica spending $50,000 while I sat in a hospital bed. I thought about Catherine's workshop, locked and mortgaged without my knowledge. I'm ready, I said. My son's next move shocked even Thomas. Instead of backing down, he doubled down by filing an emergency guardianship petition, claiming I lacked capacity and was being manipulated. The petition arrived on day 8, delivered by a process server, who looked embarrassed to be handing it to me. Thomas read through it carefully, his jaw tightening with every page. They're asking for a hearing in 14 days, he said. Day 22, that's fast. What does it say? I asked. He flipped to the first page. They're claiming you suffered cognitive decline after your cardiac event, that you're easily confused, unable to make sound decisions, and that I'm exerting undue influence over you. I felt my chest tighten. They're saying I'm senile. Yes, Thomas kept reading. And they have evidence. A letter from a neurologist, photos of the house in neglected condition, and social media posts from Jessica claiming you're not yourself. Let me see the letter. He handed it to me. The letter was on official medical letterhead, dated 3 weeks after my heart attack. It was signed by someone named Dr. Michelle Torres, a neurologist I'd never heard of. Mr. Morrison presents with mild cognitive impairment following his recent cardiac event. He exhibits confusion, memory lapses, and difficulty with decision-making. I recommend a structured living environment and assistance with financial matters. I read it twice. I've never met this woman. Thomas looked up sharply. You're sure? Positive. I've never seen a neurologist. My cardiologist cleared me. This is fake. Thomas pulled out his phone and started typing. Let me check something. 2 hours later, Thomas came back with a folder full of printouts. Dr. Michelle Torres is a real neurologist, he said. She's licensed in Oregon, has an office in downtown Portland. But here's the problem: I pulled your medical records. There's no record of you ever visiting her. No appointment, no consultation, nothing. So she lied. Worse. Thomas spread out the printouts on the table. They were screenshots from a social media platform, photos from a health and wellness event 6 months ago. In one photo, Doctor. Torres and Jessica stood together, arms around each other, smiling. They're friends, I said quietly. More than friends. Look at the caption. He pointed. Love this girl, can't wait for our next influencer collab. Then Jessica asked her to write a fake evaluation, I said. Yes, and that's medical fraud. Dr. Torres could lose her license over this. I stared at the photo. My daughter-in-law and a doctor conspiring to have me declared incompetent. Can we prove it? I asked. Already working on it, Thomas said. I've subpoenaed her records. If she can't produce documentation of your visit, she's done. While Thomas dealt with Dr. Torres, Jessica launched a different kind of attack. She started posting on social media carefully worded messages designed to look like concern, but meant to destroy my reputation. I'm so worried about Dad today. He's been so confused since the hospital, praying for clarity. It breaks my heart to see him like this. He doesn't recognize how much help he needs. Please keep him in your thoughts. A stranger has moved into his house and is making all his decisions now. I don't know what to do. The posts spread. Friends of friends shared them. People I'd known for years started looking at me differently when I went to the hardware store. And then 3 days after the petition was filed, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, a woman who'd lived on this street for 40 years, called Adult Protective Services. She meant well. She'd seen Jessica's posts, believed them, and thought I was being abused. 2 days later, a caseworker from Adult Protective Services showed up at my door. She was professional, polite, and thorough. She walked through the house, asked me questions, checked the refrigerator, looked at my medications. Mr. Morrison. She said finally, I don't see any signs of abuse or neglect. Your home is clean, you're well-groomed, and you seem perfectly capable of making your own decisions." Thank you," I said. "I'll file a report stating that. But I have to ask, are you aware that there's a guardianship petition pending?" "Yes," she nodded. "Just so you know, the court will take my assessment into account. You're doing fine." She left. Thomas closed the door behind her. "Now that's good," he said. "But the damage is done. Half the neighborhood thinks you're incompetent now." He was right. The next time I saw Mrs. Patterson, she looked away. On day 12, Thomas brought in Dr. Robert Mitchell, a geriatric psychiatrist with 30 years of experience. He'd agreed to evaluate me and provide an independent assessment for the court. Dr. Mitchell was older than I expected, maybe 70, with white hair and kind eyes. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and talked to me for 2 hours. He asked about my life, my work, my wife. He asked me to remember lists of words, solve simple math problems, draw shapes. At the end, he administered something called the MMSE, the Mini Mental State Examination. "It's a standard cognitive test," he explained. "Maximum score is 30. Anything above 24 is considered normal. I scored 29. "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Mitchell said, closing his notebook, "you are perfectly lucid. There is no evidence of cognitive impairment. Your memory is sharp, your reasoning is sound, and you are fully capable of making your own decisions. I'll be happy to testify to that in court." I felt a weight lift off my chest. On day 13, David and Jessica showed up at my door. I didn't want to let them in, but Thomas said it was better to hear what they had to say. So I opened the door. David was holding a stack of brochures, Cedar Ridge Assisted Living. I could see the glossy photos, smiling elderly people, sunny courtyards, nurses and scrubs. "Dad," David said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk about your living situation." "I'm fine where I am." "You're not fine," Jessica said. Her voice was tight, strained. "You had a heart attack. You need care." "I'm getting care." "From him?" David jerked his head toward Thomas. "A stranger." "He's not a stranger. He's my lawyer." "He's manipulating you," Jessica said. "Dad, please. We found a great place, Cedar Ridge. It's beautiful. You'd have your own room meals, provided medical staff on site." "No." "Dad, get out." David's face darkened. "You're making a mistake." "You've said that before." "This time I mean it." I walked to the door and held it open. "Leave, now." They left. But as they got into their car, David's phone rang. He answered it on speaker loud enough for me to hear through the open window. "Gregory says the guardianship is a sure thing," David said to whoever was on the other end. Then he looked back at the house. "Enjoy your independence while you can, Dad." The car pulled away. That night, Thomas found me sitting outside the locked workshop. I'd been there for an hour just staring at the new brass lock David had installed, the one I didn't have a key for. "Mr. Morrison," Thomas said quietly. "I taught him how to fix a car," I said, "how to build a bookshelf, how to stand up for himself when the world pushed him down." I looked up at Thomas. My son forgot who taught him how to be stubborn. Thomas didn't say anything. He just sat down on the step beside me. "We're going to win this," he said finally. "Are we?" "Yes. We have Dr. Mitchell's evaluation. We have the APS report. We have proof that Dr. Torres never examined you. And we have the truth." I looked at the locked door, Catherine's workshop. The place where I had taught my son how to work with his hands, how to create something from nothing. The truth doesn't always win," I said. "No," Thomas agreed. "But we're going to fight like hell anyway." I nodded. Because what else could I do? Day 22 was coming, and I'd be ready. Thomas had been organizing evidence for over an hour when it happened. We were sitting at the old dining table, the same one Catherine and I had bought 32 years ago, when we first moved into this house, surrounded by folders, medical records, and legal documents. Dr. Mitchell's psychiatric evaluation sat neatly on one side, the APS report on the other. Everything we needed to fight David's guardianship petition was laid out in front of us like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. "We have a strong case," Thomas said, tapping the stack of papers. "The fake POA, the mortgage fraud, the placebo pills. Dr. Torres' fraud, it's overwhelming. Judge Brennan will see right through David's manipulation." I nodded, but I wasn't really listening. My eyes kept drifting toward Catherine's old filing cabinet in the corner of the room, the one she'd used for years to keep household records, medical bills, and warranties for appliances we no longer owned. After she died, I'd never had the heart to go through it. I'd just left it there untouched, like a shrine to the life we'd once had. Thomas noticed. "Bill, you okay?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "I was just thinking about Catherine. She would have known what to do about all of this." Thomas stood and walked over to the cabinet. "Mind if I check in here? There might be old financial records that could help establish a timeline." "Go ahead," I said. "I haven't touched it in 9 years." He pulled open the top drawer, neatly labeled folders, paid bills from 2015 insurance documents. The second drawer was the same. But when he pulled open the bottom drawer, something shifted. A single envelope slid out from beneath a stack of old tax returns and landed softly on the floor. Thomas bent down and picked it up. "Bill," he said slowly, "you need to see this." I stood and crossed the room. The envelope was old, the edges slightly yellowed, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Catherine's handwriting, neat, precise, the way she always wrote. It read, "To Bill, open only if I'm gone." My breath caught in my throat. Thomas handed it to me without a word. The envelope was still sealed. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the realness of it. Catherine had written this. She had hidden it, and she had wanted me to find it. "Take your time," Thomas said quietly, stepping back to give me space. I sat down at the table, my hands trembling as I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, the same stationery Catherine had always used, pale blue with tiny flowers along the border. I unfolded it slowly, and the first line hit me like a fist to the chest. "My dearest Bill, if you're reading this, I am gone." I kept reading, my eyes moving across the page, and with every sentence the world around me seemed to tilt and blur. David, 16 years old, $5,000. She knew. She'd known all along. My hands started shaking so badly, I had to set the letter down on the table. I pressed my palms flat against the wood, trying to steady myself, trying to breathe. Thomas was watching me, concern etched across his face, but he didn't say anything. He just waited. I picked the letter back up and kept reading. Every word felt like a knife. I confronted him. He cried. He begged, and I believed him. No, I wanted to believe him. The room felt too small, too hot. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I protected him from the consequences. I closed my eyes, but all I could see was Catherine. Not the Catherine from 9 years ago, frail and exhausted in a hospital bed, but the Catherine from before that. The Catherine who used to stand at the kitchen window, watching David work in the shop with me. The Catherine who would smile when I came home, but always looked just a little sad when David left. I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. It was a few weeks before she died. We were sitting on the porch together watching the sun set over the trees. She'd been quiet all day, which wasn't unusual. She was tired a lot by then, but that evening she turned to me and said something I didn't understand at the time. That Bill, she'd said softly, I failed him. "What are you talking about?" I'd asked, reaching for her hand. "You've been the best mother anyone could ask for." She shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. "No, I wasn't. I thought I was protecting him, but I wasn't. I was just scared. And now it's too late. Catherine, you're not making sense. You didn't fail anyone." She looked at me, then really looked at me and said, "I failed him, Bill. I failed you both." I'd told her she was wrong. I'd told her she was just tired, that the medication was making her confused. But she wasn't confused. She knew exactly what she was talking about. And now, 9 years later, sitting at this table with her letter in my hands, I finally understood. She'd been carrying this guilt the entire time. She'd been living with it, dying with it, and she'd never told me. I looked up at Thomas, my vision blurred with tears. I couldn't speak. I just held the letter out to him. "Read it," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to hear it out loud. I need to know I'm not imagining this." Thomas hesitated. "Bill, are you sure this is—" "Read it," I said again, more firmly this time. He took the letter from my hand and began to read aloud. His voice was steady, calm, but I could hear the weight behind every word. "My dearest Bill, if you're reading this, I am gone. I pray you found this letter before it was too late, but knowing you, you probably tucked it away and forgot about it. You always said I worried too much." I closed my eyes, hearing Catherine's voice in my head as Thomas read. "I need to tell you something I should have told you 22 years ago. I have carried this guilt every single day since, and it has eaten away at me. I need you to know the truth, even if I am no longer here to face the consequences." Thomas paused. I opened my eyes and looked at him. "Go on," I said. He nodded and continued. "When David was 16, he stole $5,000 from our savings account. I found the withdrawal slip hidden in his jacket pocket when I was doing laundry. I confronted him. He cried. He begged. He told me he had made a terrible mistake, that he'd borrowed money from the wrong people, that he was scared, that he was sorry. He promised he would never do it again. And I believed him. No, that's not entirely true. I wanted to believe him. Thomas stopped reading. He lowered the letter and looked at me, his expression pained. I sat there staring at the table, my mind racing. $5,000. David had stolen $5,000 when he was 16 and Catherine had known. She'd confronted him. She'd covered for him, and she'd never told me. All these years she'd carried this alone. She knew, I said quietly more to myself than to Thomas. She knew what he was. Thomas set the letter down carefully on the table. Do you want me to keep reading? I looked at the letter, then at Thomas, then out the window toward the workshop, where Catherine used to stand and watch us work. I could almost see her there now, arms crossed, that sad little smile on her face. Not yet, I said finally. I need a minute. Thomas nodded and stepped back, giving me space. I sat there in silence, staring at my late wife's handwriting, and for the first time in 9 years, I felt like I was seeing her clearly. Not the perfect mother, not the devoted wife, just Catherine, flawed, scared, and carrying a secret that had destroyed her from the inside out. And my son had let her die with it. After a long silence, I nodded at Thomas. Read it all. I need to hear everything. He hesitated, his fingers tight on the aged paper. Bill, once I read this, you can't unhear it. I know, I said quietly. But Catherine wrote it for a reason. She wanted me to know. Thomas took a breath and began again, his voice steady, but gentle, reading my late wife's words as if she were speaking directly to me from beyond the grave. Catherine's letter, full text. My dearest Bill, if you're reading this, I am gone. I pray you found this letter before it was too late, but knowing you, you probably tucked it away and forgot about it. You always said I worried too much. I need to tell you something I should have told you 22 years ago. I have carried this guilt every single day since, and it has eaten away at me. I need you to know the truth, even if I am no longer here to face the consequences. When David was 16, he stole $5,000 from our savings account. I found the withdrawal slip hidden in his jacket pocket when I was doing laundry. I confronted him. He cried. He begged. He told me he had made a terrible mistake, that he'd borrowed money from the wrong people, that he was scared, that he was sorry. He promised he would never do it again. And I believed him. No, that's not entirely true. I wanted to believe him. I wanted so badly to believe that our son was still the sweet boy I had raised, that this was just a mistake, that he would learn from it and grow. So I did the worst thing a mother can do. I protected him from the consequences. I took money from my own account and covered the withdrawal. I never told you. I told David that this was his one chance, that if he ever did anything like this again, I would tell you everything. But Bill, he did do it again. Not the stealing, at least, not that I know of, but the lying. Over and over. Small lies, big lies, manipulations. I watched him lie to you about where he was going, about his grades, about his friends, about Jessica. I watched him charm his way out of trouble time and time again. And I said nothing, because I had already made my choice. I had already taught him that there were no real consequences, that love meant protecting him from the truth, that he could always count on me to cover for him. I ruined him, Bill. I see that now. I thought I was being a good mother. I thought I was showing him grace. But grace without accountability is not love, it's cowardice. By the time I realized what I had done, it was too late. He was already who he was going to be, and I had no one to blame but myself. Bill, I am begging you, do not make the same mistake I did. Love does not mean enabling. Love does not mean excusing. Love does not mean pretending. Sometimes love means consequences. If David ever does something that hurts, you do not protect him the way I did. Do not let guilt or shame or hope cloud your judgment. Do what I should have done 22 years ago. Hold him accountable. I know you will struggle with this. You are a kind man, a forgiving man. But kindness without boundaries is not kindness, it's surrender. I am so sorry I never told you. I am so sorry I carried this alone. I am so sorry I failed our son. But you don't have to. Please, Bill, don't let him destroy you the way I let him destroy me. With all my love, Catherine. Thomas's voice cracked on the last line. He lowered the letter and looked at me, his eyes glistening. I couldn't speak. My chest felt hollow, as if someone had reached inside and pulled out everything that mattered. She died thinking she'd destroyed him. I whispered finally, my voice breaking. She carried that guilt for 9 years, and he never knew. He never cared. Bill, he let her die believing it was her fault. My hands were shaking. He let his own mother die in guilt. Thomas set the letter down carefully on the table and sat back, giving me space. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to hold myself together, but the grief was too much. It wasn't just the letter. It wasn't just the theft. It was the realization that my son had been broken for longer than I'd ever known, and that Catherine had seen it, had lived with it, had died with it. Flashback, summer 2003. Catherine stood in the laundry room, holding a crumpled withdrawal slip in her hand. $5,000. Withdrawn from our joint savings account. The signature was shaky, barely legible, but it was David's. She waited until I left for the workshop that morning, then confronted him in the kitchen. "David," she said quietly, sliding the slip across the table. "What is this?" He looked at it, and for a moment his face went pale. Then just as quickly, the tears came. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. I messed up. I borrowed money from some guys at school, and they said if I didn't pay them back. Sir." "Stop." Catherine's voice was firm, but her hands were trembling. "Who did you borrow money from?" "I can't tell you. They'll hurt me, Mom. I'm scared." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the fear in his eyes. Or at least she thought she did. "David, if you're in danger, we need to tell your father. We need to go to the police." "No!" He grabbed her hand, his voice desperate. "Please, Mom, please. If Dad finds out, he'll never forgive me. I swear I'll pay it back. I'll get a job. I'll do anything. Just please don't tell him." Catherine hesitated. She looked at her 16-year-old son, tears streaming down his face, and she made a choice. "This is your one chance," she said quietly. "I will cover this. I will not tell your father. But if you ever do something like this again, I will tell him everything. Do you understand me?" David nodded, his face wet with tears. "Thank you, Mom. I love you. I'm so sorry." She pulled him into a hug, and he clung to her like a child. But even then, deep down, she wondered if she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. Present day. "What do you want to do with the letter?" Thomas asked gently. I stared at it lying there on the table, Catherine's handwriting, still clear after all these years. My first instinct was to keep it private, to protect her, to keep this pain between us. But then I thought about what she'd written. "Sometimes love means consequences." I looked up at Thomas. "We're going to use it at the deposition." He blinked. "Bill, are you sure this is deeply personal?" "I know." My voice was steady now. "But Catherine wrote this for a reason. She wanted me to know what she went through, and I want my son to know what his mother suffered because of him." Thomas nodded slowly. "This will destroy him." I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. "Good," I said quietly. "Maybe being destroyed is the first step toward being rebuilt." I looked out the window toward the darkened workshop, the place where I had taught my son how to hold a hammer, how to measure twice and cut once, how to build something that would last. "Tomorrow," I said, "my son will learn what his mother really thought of him." Thomas met my eyes. "Once we do this, there's no going back." "I know," I said, "but Catherine already showed me the way forward. I'm just finally listening." The deposition room was smaller than I'd imagined, just a long table, 6 chairs, and a court reporter with her stenography machine. My son sat across from me in a navy suit, pretending he didn't know what was about to happen. Jessica sat beside him in a cream blouse and pearls, checking her phone. Gregory Stevens, David's silver-haired attorney, sat at the head of the table with a legal pad and a smug expression. Thomas sat beside me, calm and prepared. The court reporter looked up. "Please state your name for the record." "William Morrison." "You understand you are under oath?" "I do." Gregory leaned forward. "Mr. Morrison, you were hospitalized for 8 weeks following a cardiac event, correct? And during that time, you were on morphine." "Besbadin de Molen, Wendoid." "For the first few days, yes." "Would you say your judgment was impaired?" Thomas started to object, but I held up a hand. "My judgment was fine, Mr. Stevens. I knew exactly what was happening." Gregory made a note. "You've formed a close relationship with Mr. Bennett recently. Would you say he's had significant influence over your decisions?" "Thomas has helped me see the truth," I said. "That's not influence, that's clarity. And this truth involves accusing your own son of—" "I'd like to submit something," I said, cutting him off. The room went quiet. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope. Catherine's handwriting was still visible on the front. I set it on the table. "This is a letter written by my late wife, Catherine Morrison, 1 week before she passed away. I think it's relevant to these proceedings." Gregory frowned. "A personal letter has no bearing on—" "It establishes a pattern of behavior spanning multiple decades," Thomas said smoothly. It's absolutely relevant. The court reporter's fingers moved across her machine. David's face had gone pale. "Go ahead, Mr. Morrison," Thomas said. I opened the letter. I didn't read the whole thing, there was no need, but I summarized the key points and read the parts that mattered most. "My wife carried a secret for 22 years, I said. A secret about our son. I cleared my throat and began. When David was 16 years old, he stole $5,000 from our savings account. David's chair scraped. Let him finish, Thomas said sharply. I kept reading. I found the withdrawal slip hidden in his jacket pocket. I confronted him. He cried, he begged, and I believed him. Or rather, I wanted to believe him. So I did the worst thing a mother can do. I protected him from the consequences. I covered the withdrawal. I never told Bill. I told David this was his one chance, but he did it again. Not the stealing, but the lying. Over and over. And I said nothing because I had already taught him that there were no real consequences. I paused looking at David. He was staring at the table jaw clenched. I ruined him, Bill. I thought I was being a good mother, but I wasn't. I was being a coward. By the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late. The stenography machine kept clicking. Jessica gripped the edge of the table. I looked directly at my son and read the final line. She blamed herself for 22 years. She died believing it was her fault. And in this letter, she warned me, don't make the same mistake I did. Love does not mean enabling. Sometimes love means consequences. I set the letter down. The room was silent except for the soft click of the machine. David stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to us. He didn't speak. He just stared out at the parking lot. David, Gregory said carefully, you don't have to. Did she really think that? David's voice was quiet, almost broken. Yes, I said. And you're using it against me. I'm using her truth. The truth she should have told me years ago. David turned his face a mixture of anger and grief. Mom died thinking she'd destroyed me. No, I said. She didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself. She just gave you too many chances. Before David could respond, Thomas opened a folder and slid a document across the table. While we're establishing patterns, Thomas said calmly, I'd like to submit evidence obtained through a lawful subpoena of Jessica Morrison's phone records. Jessica's head snapped up. What? Thomas read from the printout. Text message from Jessica Morrison to David Morrison, dated June 10th, 2024. Quote, did you switch the medication yet? We need this to happen soon. End quote. The color drained from Jessica's face. Gregory stood. Where did you get that? A subpoena, Thomas said. Submitted to the court last week. Fully legal. Jessica looked at David, then at Gregory. I need to speak to my lawyer. You should, Thomas said. This proves premeditation. You weren't just stealing, you were conspiring to harm him. Gregory's face flushed. I'm calling a recess. Jessica was already on her feet, phone pressed to her ear as she hurried out. David remained by the window unmoving. Gregory gathered his papers and followed Jessica, leaving the three of us alone. The court reporter looked up. Are we off the record? Yes, Thomas said. She stepped out, closing the door. David still hadn't moved. After a long moment, he turned. His eyes were red. That she died thinking she ruined me. I stood slowly. She died carrying guilt that wasn't hers. You let her die with it. And now you've done the same thing to me. Lied, manipulated, stolen. But I'm not going to make her mistake. What mistake? Protecting you from the consequences. He stared at me, then looked down. She really wrote that? Yes, and she was right. You destroyed yourself. She just gave you too many chances. David didn't respond. He just stood there, looking more lost than I'd ever seen him. Thomas packed his files. The hearing is in 4 days, David. If I were you, I'd think carefully about what you want to say to the judge. David looked at me one last time, then walked out without a word. I sat back down, hands trembling. Thomas placed a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing. I looked at Catherine's letter still open on the table. I know, but it doesn't make it hurt any less. The courtroom was colder than I remembered, or maybe it was just my son's eyes from across the aisle that made everything feel frozen. We sat on opposite sides of the room, Thomas and me on the left, David and Jessica on the right, with Gregory Stevens standing at the podium like a general preparing for war. The benches were polished oak, the walls lined with legal books no one ever read. At the front sat Judge Sarah Brennan, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-50s with graying hair pulled into a tight bun. She had a reputation for being tough, but fair, especially in elder law cases. This is a guardianship hearing for William Morrison. Judge Brennan said, her voice crisp. Mr. Stevens, you may begin. Gregory stood buttoning his suit jacket. Your Honor, this case is about a vulnerable elderly man being manipulated by an opportunist. I felt Thomas stiffen beside me. My client David Morrison is deeply concerned about his father's welfare. Mr. Morrison suffered a severe cardiac event, was hospitalized for 8 weeks, and upon discharge he was immediately isolated by Mr. Thomas Bennett, a man who claims to be a friend but has clear financial motives. Judge Brennan glanced at Thomas, then at me. Mr. Stevens, do you have evidence of this alleged manipulation? We do, Your Honor. We'd like to call Dr. Michelle Torres to the stand. A woman in a gray suit stood from the gallery, early 40s, dark hair, professional demeanor. She took the stand and was sworn in. Dr. Torres. Stevens began, you're a licensed neurologist in Oregon, correct? Oh, yes. And you evaluated Mr. William Morrison, did you not? I did. And what was your finding? Mild cognitive impairment, consistent with post-cardiac syndrome. In my professional opinion, Mr. Morrison is vulnerable to undue influence. Stevens nodded, satisfied. Thank you, Doctor. Judge Brennan looked at Thomas. Cross-examination, Mr. Bennett. Thomas stood slowly picking up a folder. Dr. Torres, when did you examine Mr. Morrison? She blinked. I evaluated his medical records. That's not what I asked. When did you physically examine him? A pause. I didn't physically examine him. You didn't examine him, Thomas repeated. So you diagnosed cognitive impairment without ever meeting him. I reviewed his records thoroughly. Your Honor, Thomas said, pulling a photograph from his folder. I'd like to submit Exhibit D. This is a photograph from Jessica Morrison's social media account, dated March 15, 2023. It shows Dr. Torres and Mrs. Morrison together at a wellness influencer event. The caption reads, so grateful for amazing friends like Michelle. The courtroom went silent. Dr. Torres's face paled. Dr. Torres, Thomas continued, you're friends with Jessica Morrison, aren't you? We've met socially. And you wrote a medical evaluation for a man you've never examined at the request of your friend, who stands to benefit financially from his incapacitation. Is that correct? Judge Brennan held up a hand. That's enough. Dr. Torres, I'm referring your conduct to the Oregon Medical Board. Your testimony is stricken from the record. Dr. Torres stood quickly and left the courtroom, her heels clicking against the floor. I felt a small surge of relief, but it didn't last long. Your Honor, Stevens said, standing again, I'd like to call Thomas Bennett to the stand. Thomas froze. Judge Brennan frowned. Mr. Bennett is representing Mr. Morrison. He's also a material witness, Your Honor. His relationship with my client's father is central to this case. Judge Brennan considered, then nodded. Mr. Bennett, please take the stand. Thomas stood slowly and walked to the witness box. He was sworn and his jaw tight. Stevens approached with a thin smile. Mr. Bennett, how much student debt do you currently carry? Thomas hesitated. $123,000. And you're aware that Mr. Morrison's estate is valued at approximately $650,000. I've seen the appraisal, yes. Mr. Bennett, if Mr. Morrison were to leave you a portion of his estate in gratitude for your help, you wouldn't refuse it, would you? Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it. The pause was too long. Mr. Bennett, Stevens pressed. I haven't thought about it, Thomas said finally. You haven't thought about it? Stevens's voice dripped with skepticism. You're carrying 6 figures of debt. You've spent weeks cultivating a relationship with a wealthy, elderly, vulnerable man, and you haven't once considered whether he might leave you something in his will. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. I saw Jessica lean forward, a satisfied smile on her face. Thomas's hands gripped the edge of the witness box. My relationship with Bill isn't about money, but you wouldn't refuse it if he offered, would you? Thomas didn't answer. Your Honor, Stevens said, turning to the judge, this man is no different from my client's son, except he has no legal or familial claim. He's an opportunist. Judge Brennan called a recess. In the hallway outside, Thomas leaned against the wall, his hands shaking. What if they're right? He whispered. What if I am just... I grabbed his hand firm and steady. Stop. You're here because 30 years ago, I gave you $300 for college books and you never forgot it. My son stole $5,000 from his own mother and never remembered. That's the difference. Thomas looked at me, his eyes red. Bill, you didn't come back into my life for money, Thomas. You came back because you're a good man. Don't let them take that away from you. He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. We walked back into the courtroom. Judge Brennan took her seat. Mr. Stevens, she said, her voice cold. Attacking opposing counsel doesn't address the documented fraud, financial abuse, and elder exploitation your client has committed. The court has seen the evidence, the falsified power of attorney, the unauthorized mortgage, the medication, tampering. Mr. Bennett's student debt is irrelevant. It was a small victory, but as I looked at Thomas, I could see the damage had been done. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about Thomas on the witness stand, about the way my son's lawyer had twisted something honorable into something ugly. Thomas had come back into my life not because he wanted something from me, but because he remembered kindness, and Stevens had made it sound like a con. I lay awake in the small hotel room Thomas had booked for us, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of traffic outside. Somewhere across town, David and Jessica were probably sleeping soundly, confident that their strategy was working. But I wasn't going to let them win. The next morning, we returned to the courtroom. Judge Brennan took her seat, and Stevens stood once again ready to continue his attack. Your Honor. Stevens began, yesterday we established that Mr. Bennett has significant financial motivation to influence my client's father. I'd like to continue exploring. I stood up. The courtroom went silent. Thomas grabbed my arm. Bill, what are you? Your Honor. I said, my voice clear and steady. This is a hearing about my competence. If I'm competent, I should be allowed to speak. Judge Brennan raised an eyebrow. Mr. Morrison, this is highly irregular. I know, Your Honor, but if I'm mentally sound enough to make my own decisions, then I should be sound enough to defend the people who've stood by me. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Go ahead, Mr. Morrison, but keep it brief. I stepped into the aisle, hands clasped in front of me. I didn't look at David, I looked at the judge. Your Honor, I've listened to Mr. Stevens spend 2 days trying to paint Thomas Bennett as some kind of opportunist. But here's what he's not telling you. I paused, letting the words settle. Thomas has never asked me for a single thing, not once. When I offered him money to help with his student loans, he refused. When I suggested he stay at my house instead of paying for a hotel, he refused. He didn't come back into my life looking for something. He came back because 30 years ago, I gave him $300 for college textbooks, and he never forgot it. I turned slightly, glancing at David for the first time. He was staring at the table. Mr. Stevens wants you to believe that Thomas's $123,000 in student debt from law school is proof of bad character. But that debt came from years of honest work, from trying to build a better life. My son, on the other hand, owes $500,000 from failed real estate schemes and gambling debts, and he tried to solve that problem by putting my life at risk. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Stevens stood. Your Honor, that's an inflammatory... Judge Brennan held up a hand. Let him finish. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. This is my will, Your Honor. I had it drawn up 2 weeks ago with a different attorney, one who has no connection to anyone in this room. I'm going to read it aloud because I want everyone here to understand that I made these decisions with a clear mind. I unfolded the paper and read, I leave my workshop and the property it sits on to my son David Morrison on the condition that he completes a 2-year apprenticeship in woodworking or carpentry, to be verified by a licensed tradesperson. If he does not complete this requirement within 5 years of my passing, the property will be sold and the proceeds donated to a vocational training program. I looked up at David. His face was pale. I leave my house and the remaining estate to Thomas Bennett in gratitude for his friendship and his integrity. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Stevens was on his feet objecting, but I kept talking. I chose this, Your Honor. I chose it with a clear mind, a sound mind, and a mind that knows the difference between a man who helps because he cares and a man who manipulates because he's desperate. I turned to face Judge Brennan directly. Do I sound incompetent to you? The room fell silent. Judge Brennan leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she smiled. Mr. Morrison, she said, that is the most lucid statement I've heard in this courtroom today. Mr. Stevens, your strategy has backfired. Mr. Morrison has just demonstrated both clarity of will and sharp judgment. I see no evidence of incapacity. Stevens sank into his chair, his face red. Judge Brennan continued. This court will take a brief recess, but I'll say this now, based on the evidence presented, the falsified power of attorney, the financial exploitation, the medication tampering, and Mr. Morrison's clear demonstration of competence, I am inclined to deny the guardianship petition. She stood, and the bailiff called, "All rise." In the hallway, Thomas leaned against the wall, his hands shaking. A moment later, a woman in a gray suit approached Judge Brennan's clerk. "Mr. Bennett," she said quietly, "the judge asked me to let you know the petition will be formally denied within the hour. Congratulations." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. The clerk walked away. I put a hand on his shoulder. "It's over." He looked at me, his eyes wet. "Bill, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. You were there when I needed you. That's enough." We walked back toward the courtroom. I was about to sit down when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I opened the message. "Nice workshop you've got. Be a shame if something happened to it. Barted G." My blood went cold. I stared at the screen, reading it again. The single letter at the end. J. Jessica. I handed the phone to Thomas without a word. He read the message and the color drained from his face. "Bill," he whispered, "this is a threat." I looked across the courtroom at Jessica, sitting beside David. She was staring at her phone, a faint smile on her lips. "I know," I said quietly, "and she just made a mistake. Just a quick note before we continue, parts of the next section are shaped with storytelling elements and may not fully reflect real-life events. If this story resonates with you, feel free to share it and subscribe for more. And if you'd rather not continue, you can stop here anytime." The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Portland Fire Bureau. The words barely registered at first, my brain still foggy with sleep, my body aching from the long day in court. But then the dispatcher's voice cut through the haze. "Mr. Morrison, your property is on fire." I was out of bed before I fully understood what I'd heard. Thomas was staying in the guest room. He'd insisted on being close, in case David or Jessica tried something, and I pounded on his door. "Thomas, the workshop's on fire." We were in his car within 3 minutes, speeding through empty streets toward my house. I kept my phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dispatcher's calm instructions to stay away, to let the firefighters handle it. But I wasn't listening. Not really. We were still a mile away when I saw it. An orange glow against the black sky, flames licking upward like reaching hands. My chest tightened. 40 years. 40 years of work, of memories of Catherine standing in the doorway, watching me teach David how to hold a chisel, how to measure a board, how to sand a piece of oak until it was smooth as glass. Thomas pushed the gas pedal harder. When we pulled onto my street, the scene was chaos. 2 fire trucks blocked the road, hoses stretched across the gravel driveway, water arcing through the air in silver streams. Firefighters shouted to each other over the roar of the flames. The workshop, Catherine's workshop, the one I'd built with my own hands 32 years ago, was engulfed. 60% gone, maybe more. The roof on the left side had already collapsed. I jumped out of the car and started running. Sir, you can't." A firefighter grabbed my arm, pulling me back. I struggled against him, my eyes locked on the inferno. "That's my workshop, I need to." "You need to stay back," he said firmly. "There's nothing you can do." I stood there helpless and watched it burn. Catherine's oak workbench, the one she'd insisted I build, because she wanted to learn woodworking too. The one where she'd spent Saturday mornings sanding birdhouses and picture frames, was a twisted, flaming skeleton. The tools I'd collected over 4 decades were melting, warping, turning to ash. The smell of burning wood mixed with something chemical, something wrong. Every project I'd ever started, every half-finished chair and table leg and cabinet door was being consumed. The roof groaned, then collapsed inward with a shower of sparks. My legs gave out. I sank to my knees on the wet grass, and Thomas knelt beside me, his hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. By dawn, the fire was under control. 60% of the workshop was destroyed. The right side still stood blackened and smoking, but the left side was gone, just charred beams and piles of ash. A man in a yellow jacket approached us. He was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered with soot streaks across his face. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Fire Marshal Roberts. I need to ask you a few questions." I nodded numb. "When was the last time you were in the workshop?" "Best and be breezed, the brained." 3 days ago, before the court hearing. "Do you keep gasoline or other accelerants inside?" "No, just wood tools varnish." Roberts wrote something on his clipboard. "Mr. Morrison, I've completed a preliminary investigation. This was arson." The word hit me like a punch. "Arson?" "Yes, sir. We found evidence of an accelerant gasoline poured along the base of the east wall. Your security camera wiring was cut at approximately 1:15 this morning. And we recovered a gasoline can about 20 yards into the woods behind your property. It has fingerprints on it." Thomas stood. "How long until you can identify the prints?" "We're running them now. Should have results by this afternoon." I stared at the smoking ruins. Someone had done this. Someone had stood on my property, poured gasoline on Catherine's workshop, and lit a match. Jessica's text message flashed through my mind. "Be ashamed if something happened to it. Just do." By late afternoon, Thomas and I were sitting in a small conference room at the courthouse, some follow-up meeting, about the guardianship dismissal paperwork, when the door burst open. 2 police officers entered, followed by a woman in a dark blazer and badge clipped to her belt. She was in her mid-30s, sharp eyes, black hair, pulled back tight. "Detective Maria Ramirez, Portland Police," she said. "I'm looking for David Morrison." David had been sitting across the table with Gregory Stevens going over some final documents. He looked up confused. "I'm David Morrison." Detective Ramirez walked over and stood directly in front of him. "David Morrison, you are under arrest for arson in the 1st degree." The room went silent. "Oh, what?" David stood his chair, scraping back. "I didn't—" "You have the right to remain silent." Ramirez continued pulling out handcuffs. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "This is insane." David looked at me, his eyes wide. "Dad, I didn't do this. I swear to God I didn't." Ramirez turned him around and cuffed his hands behind his back. "Your fingerprints were on the gasoline can recovered at the scene," she said. "Your vehicle was captured on a neighbor's security camera at 1:30 this morning, leaving the area. You have motive, means, and opportunity." "I wasn't there," David shouted. "Dad, you have to believe me." Gregory Stevens was on his feet. "Detective, my client will not be making any statements without counsel present." "He doesn't need to," Ramirez said. "We have everything we need." She led David toward the door. He twisted back, looking at me, and our eyes met. And I saw it. Real fear, real desperation. Not manipulation, not the practiced tears he'd used on Catherine all those years ago. This was something else. This was truth. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking. "Please." Then he was gone, led down the hallway in handcuffs. Thomas stood beside me, watching through the doorway. "Bill," he said quietly, "all the evidence points to him. The fingerprints, the camera, the text from Jessica. He did this." I shook my head slowly, still staring at the empty hallway. "No," I said, "he didn't." Thomas frowned. "Bill, I know he's your son, but he wouldn't burn the workshop," I said, my voice firm. "That's the one thing he actually wanted. It's in the will. He was supposed to get it. Why would he destroy the one thing he stood to inherit?" Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it. I turned to face him. Someone set him up, and I think I know who. 2 hours after my son was arrested, I stood outside the Multnomah County Jail with a cashier's check for $50,000 in my hand. Thomas stood beside me, arms crossed, staring at the concrete building like it might explode. "You're really going to do this?" he asked quietly. "Yes." "Bill, if you're wrong, if he did burn down that workshop, you're putting up your house as collateral. You could lose everything." I looked at him. "I'm not wrong." Thomas shook his head. "How can you be so sure?" "Because my son is greedy," I said. "Greedy people are rational. They don't destroy the thing they want most. Burning down the workshop makes no sense. It's the one thing he stood to inherit. Why would he destroy his own future?" Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it. He couldn't argue with that. We walked inside, filled out the paperwork, and an hour later, David walked out through the steel doors, still wearing the clothes he'd been arrested in. His eyes were red, his face pale. When he saw me standing there, he stopped. "Dad." "Let's go," I said. We drove back to my house in silence. David sat in the back seat staring out the window. When we finally pulled into the driveway, what was left of it with the blackened ruins of the workshop still smoldering in the distance, he spoke. "Why," his voice was hoarse. "Why would you bail me out after everything I've done to you?" I turned around to look at him. "Because I believe you. About this." He blinked confused. "You believe me?" "I don't believe you're innocent of everything," I said. "But I believe you didn't burn down that workshop. You're a lot of things, David, but you're not stupid. And only a stupid person would destroy the one thing they actually wanted." David's jaw tightened. "The police have my fingerprints on the gas can. They have my car on camera." "I know," I said. "That's why we're going to figure out how someone set you up." Thomas turned from the front seat. "David, where were you last night?" "From 10 p.m. until 2 a.m. David rubbed his face. "I was at Murphy's bar, the one on Burnside. I got there around 10:30 and stayed until they kicked me out at midnight. Were you alone? Yeah, I needed to drink. After everything at the courthouse, after Dad read that, Will out loud, He trailed off. Can anyone confirm you were there? Thomas asked. The bartender. I paid with my credit card. I was pretty hammered by the end of it. Thomas pulled out his phone and started making calls. 20 minutes later, he had confirmation. Murphy's security camera showed David entering at 10:43 p.m. and leaving at 11:57 p.m. His credit card receipt showed he'd closed out his tab at 11:47. The bartender, a guy named Colin, confirmed David had been there all night and was barely able to stand when he left. Okay, Thomas said. So you left the bar just before midnight. Where did you go? Home, my apartment. I passed out on the couch. Eddie, can anyone confirm that? David shook his head. Jessica wasn't there. She said she was staying at a friend's place. I was alone. Thomas pulled up something on his phone. Your car has a GPS tracker through your insurance company, right? David nodded. Thomas scrolled through the data. Your car left Murphy's bar at 12:04 a.m. and arrived at your apartment at 12:23 a.m. After that, it didn't move. It stayed parked at your apartment until the police picked you up this afternoon. I leaned forward. The fire started at 2 a.m. That's an hour and a half after you got home. David looked at me desperate. I don't have another car, Dad. I don't even have a friend I could borrow one from. And I was passed out. I barely remember getting home. I believed him. I could see it in his eyes, the same exhaustion, the same defeat I'd seen in the courtroom when the police had taken him away. This wasn't manipulation. This was truth. But that left a bigger question. If you didn't do it, I said slowly, then who did, and why make it look like you did? Thomas set his phone down. Someone who had access to David's car. Someone who could have taken his keys driven to the workshop, planted his fingerprints on a gas can, and then returned the car before David woke up. David's face went pale. Jessica, she has a spare key to my car. I felt something cold settle in my chest. She was at the courthouse when I read the will. She heard me say the workshop would go to you if you completed the apprenticeship. Thomas nodded slowly. And if there's no workshop, there's no apprenticeship. Which means David can't meet the condition. Which means he doesn't inherit. And if he doesn't inherit, I said, finishing the thought, the property gets sold and the money goes to charity. Jessica gets nothing. David stared at me. So she burned it down to make sure I couldn't get it, or to frame you, Thomas said. If you're convicted of arson, you're disqualified from inheriting anyway. Either way, she wins. We all sat in silence, the pieces falling into place. But why? David asked quietly. Why would she do that? We're married. We're supposed to be a team. I looked at him. When was the last time you saw Jessica? He frowned. Yesterday, at the courthouse. After I got arrested, I assumed I thought she'd be at the jail, or call my lawyer, but she didn't. Thomas was already dialing. He put the phone on speaker. A man's voice answered, Law Offices of Brennan and Cole. This is Thomas Bennett. I'm looking for Jessica Morrison. She's represented by your firm. Mrs. Morrison is no longer available for contact. Thomas frowned. What does that mean? It means we haven't been able to reach her since yesterday afternoon. She missed a scheduled meeting this morning. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. Has anyone checked her apartment? We sent someone. She's not there. Her car is gone. It appears she's left Portland. Thomas hung up and looked at me. She's running, I said. David's voice was barely above a whisper. Dad, do you think my wife did this? I met his eyes. Soon-to-be ex-wife. Yes, I do. He sat back, his face blank with shock. Then slowly something else crept into his expression. Anger. She framed me, he said. She burned down your workshop and framed me for it. Thomas stood. I need to contact Detective Ramirez. If Jessica's on the run, we need to find her before she disappears completely. He stepped outside to make the call. I stayed in the car with David, the two of us sitting in silence. Finally, David spoke. I'm sorry, Dad. For all of it. For the money, the pills, the POA. I'm sorry. I looked at him. He wasn't crying. He wasn't begging. He was just tired. I know, I said quietly. But sorry doesn't fix it. I know, he said, but I'm still sorry. I nodded. Then prove it. Help us find her. David's jaw tightened. I will. Thomas spent the next 2 days building a case against my daughter-in-law with the same meticulous focus he'd used to defend me, except this time I was helping. We started by going door to door. My property sat on 2 acres at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by scattered neighbors who valued their privacy as much as I did. Most of them didn't have security cameras. Most of them hadn't seen anything, but Mrs. Anderson, who lived about a quarter-mile down the road, did. She was in her late 70s, a widow, who'd lived alone since her husband passed 5 years ago. When Thomas and I knocked on her door, she answered with a cup of tea in her hand and a concerned expression. "I heard about the fire, Bill," she said. "I'm so sorry. That workshop was beautiful." "Thank you, Margaret," I said. "We're trying to figure out what happened. Do you have any security cameras?" Her face brightened. "Oh yes, my son installed one of those doorbell cameras last Christmas. A Ring, I think it's called. He said it would help me feel safer." Thomas stepped forward. "Mrs. Anderson, would you mind if we took a look at the footage from 2 nights ago, around 1 or 2 in the morning?" "Of course," she said, leading us inside. We sat in her small living room while she pulled up the app on her tablet. It took a few minutes. She wasn't particularly tech-savvy, but eventually she found the timestamp, 1:15 a.m. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. A figure in a dark hoodie walked past her driveway, heading in the direction of my property. The motion sensor had triggered the camera, capturing about 10 seconds of video before the person disappeared out of frame. "The police already looked at this," Mrs. Anderson said quietly. "They said it was your son, Bill. I'm so sorry." Thomas leaned closer to the screen. "Can you send this to my phone?" She nodded and forwarded the file. Thomas opened it on his phone, zoomed in, and played it frame by frame. Then he stopped. "Bill," he said quietly, "look at this." I leaned over. He pointed at the figure on the screen. "The police assumed this was David because of the timing and the direction. But look at the height. This person is short, maybe 5'7". David is 6'1". I squinted at the screen. He was right. The figure was noticeably shorter than the mailbox they passed, which I knew was about 5.5 feet tall. "And look here," Thomas said, zooming in further. "You can see hair sticking out from under the hood. Long hair." I stared at the screen. The figure's build was slender, the gait smooth and quick, not David's heavy, slightly lumbering walk. "It's her," I said. Thomas nodded. "It's her." Within an hour, Thomas had contacted Detective Ramirez. By that afternoon, she had a search warrant. Jessica's phone was seized and the GPS data was extracted on the spot. The results were damning. Jessica's phone had been at my property from 1:20 a.m. to 1:35 a.m. on the night of the fire, the exact window when the arson had occurred. Her car, registered in her name, had left her friend's house at 12:50 a.m., driven to my property, stayed for 15 minutes, and then returned to the friend's house by 2:10 a.m. She'd lied about where she was. She'd lied about everything. The police brought her in that evening. Thomas stayed in contact with Detective Ramirez throughout the interrogation, updating me every hour. For the first 3 hours, Jessica denied everything. She claimed her phone must have been hacked, that someone must have stolen her car, that the GPS data was wrong. She cried. She played the victim. She insisted she loved David, that she would never hurt him or his family. But in the 4th hour, Detective Ramirez played her final card. She slid a receipt across the table. A credit card receipt from a hardware store 2 days before the fire. One item, a 5-gallon gasoline can, purchased on Jessica's credit card. Jessica stared at the receipt. Her face went pale, and then slowly she broke. "I did it!" she screamed. "I did it okay. If he wasn't going to get it, then no one was. He was going to leave me after he got the inheritance. I spent years helping him with his schemes, cleaning up his messes, and he was just going to throw me away, like I was nothing. I wanted him to lose everything. I wanted that old man to watch his precious workshop burn. This family deserved to be burned to the ground." Detective Ramirez leaned back in her chair, her expression cold. "Jessica Morrison, you are under arrest for arson in the 1st-degree reckless endangerment fraud and criminal framing. You're looking at 10 to 15 years in prison." Jessica was formally charged the next morning. Thomas called me with the update while I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at the blackened remains of the workshop through the window. David was there too. He'd been staying at a motel since the bail hearing, but he'd come by that morning to check on me. When Thomas called, I put the phone on speaker so David could hear. "Jessica confessed," Thomas said. "She admitted to everything, the arson, the framing, all of it. She's being held without bail." I didn't say anything. I just looked at David. His face was blank, but his hands were shaking. "She tried to frame me," he said quietly, "for arson, to destroy my chance at redemption." It was the first time I'd ever heard him use that word. Redemption. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't tell him it would be okay. I just said yes. He looked at me, his eyes red. "What now, Dad? What do I do now?" I stood up slowly, my joints aching, my heart heavy. I walked to the window and stared out at the wreckage of the workshop. 40 years of work reduced to ash and charred wood. But it could be rebuilt. Now we rebuild, I said. The workshop, your life, the hard way, with our hands, with labor, with time. David stood beside me, staring out at the ruins. When do we start? I looked at him. His face was tired, worn, but there was something else there now. Something I hadn't seen in years. Hope. Monday, I said. 6 a.m. Don't be late. He nodded. I won't. Judge Sarah Brennan had presided over family court for 30 years, but she later told colleagues that the Morrison case reminded her why she'd become a judge in the first place. The final hearing took place on a cold morning in late October, 28 days after Jessica's arrest. The courtroom was packed. Thomas and I sat on one side, David on the other with his public defender. Jessica was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her. Her hair was pulled back, her face pale and hollow. Judge Brennan looked down from the bench, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Morrison, she began. You've been found guilty of arson in the first-degree reckless endangerment fraud and criminal framing. Do you have anything to say before sentencing? Jessica looked up, her eyes red. I was manipulated. David manipulated me into... Stop, Judge Brennan said sharply. I've read the text messages. You initiated the medication swap. Your GPS data places you at the scene of the fire. Your credit card shows you purchased the gasoline. You have no credibility left in this courtroom. Jessica's lawyer started to object, but Judge Brennan held up a hand. You didn't just commit arson, the judge continued. You attempted to destroy a family. You framed an innocent man, flawed as he may be, for a crime he didn't commit. You put lives at risk. And when confronted, you showed no remorse, only entitlement. She paused, letting the words settle. I sentence you to 12 years in the Oregon Department of Corrections with eligibility for parole after 8. Bailiff, remove her. Jessica screamed as she was led away. This isn't fair. You don't understand. The door closed behind her, cutting off her voice. Judge Brennan turned to David. Mr. Morrison, you've pleaded guilty to elder abuse, financial fraud, and reckless endangerment. These are serious crimes. You exploited your father's trust, tampered with his medication, and nearly caused his death. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? David stood, his voice quiet. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have anything to say? David looked at me, then back at the judge. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry. Judge Brennan nodded slowly. Mr. Morrison, I've reviewed the evidence. I've also read the letters submitted on your behalf, including one from your father. He believes you're capable of change. I'm not sure I agree, but I'm willing to give you a chance to prove him right. She looked down at her notes. I sentence you to 18 months suspended contingent on the following conditions: 2,000 hours of community service to be completed by rebuilding your father's workshop, full financial restitution for all damages, weekly counseling for a minimum of 2 years, and you will have no contact with Jessica Morrison for the duration of her sentence. David nodded. Yes, Your Honor. If you violate any of these terms, Judge Brennan said, her voice hard, you will serve the full 18 months in county jail. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Brennan turned to me. Mr. Morrison, would you like to make a statement? I stood slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Your Honor, my son did terrible things. He stole from me. He tampered with my medication. He put my life at risk. But he didn't burn down that workshop. That choice, not destroying the one thing he wanted, tells me there's something in him worth saving. I paused, my voice thick. My wife believed in second chances. She carried guilt for 22 years because she gave our son a chance and thought it ruined him. But maybe she was wrong. Maybe the mistake wasn't giving him a chance. It was not holding him accountable. I'm asking this court to let him rebuild literally what his wife destroyed, to earn back what he lost. Judge Brennan smiled faintly. Mr. Morrison, you are a more gracious man than most. I hope your son appreciates that. She turned back to David. The guardianship petition is permanently denied. The power of attorney is voided and will be removed from all records. Mr. Thomas Bennett is fully exonerated of any accusations of undue influence. She brought her gavel down. Court is adjourned. As we walked out of the courtroom, David stopped me in the hallway. His eyes were wet. I'll be there, Dad, every day, 6 a.m., I promise. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded. Good. 1 year later, October 2025, the workshop stood again. It was different from before, smaller, newer, simpler. But It was solid. The sign above the door read, Morrison Woodworks. Below that, in smaller letters, Morrison and Bennett Legal Services. Thomas had moved his practice into the front office. Said he liked being close to where things got built. I arrived at 6 a.m. like I did every morning. At 6:05, David pulled into the driveway. He was never late anymore. Morning, Dad, he said, grabbing his tool belt from the truck. Morning. We had a routine now. It wasn't warm. It wasn't full of laughter or forgiveness. But it was steady, comfortable, real. David had become a good carpenter, better than I'd expected. A customer came in one afternoon complaining about a table we'd delivered. The leg was wobbly. David looked at me, then at the customer. I built that one. I'll fix it. No charge. The customer left satisfied. After he was gone, I turned to David. You did good. Your mother would have been proud of that. David looked down at his hands, blinking hard. Thanks, Dad. On Saturdays, Thomas would stop by with his family. His wife Marie was a kind woman with a quick smile. Their kids Sophie 8 and James 5 would run straight to me when they arrived. Grandpa Bill, Sophie would shout, throwing her arms around my waist. I wasn't their grandfather by blood, but I was by choice. Thomas had started a program at the workshop called the Second Chance Program. Teenagers who'd made mistakes, petty theft, vandalism, minor drug charges, could learn carpentry instead of going to juvenile detention. David taught most of the classes. You're better at explaining than I am, I'd told him one afternoon. He'd looked at me surprised. You really think so? I do. One Saturday, Mrs. Patterson came by. She wanted a bookshelf, built something simple, sturdy for her grandkids. David, I said this one's yours. He looked at me confused. You sure? My son's a better craftsman than I was at his age, I said loud enough for Mrs. Patterson to hear. David's eyes went red. He turned away quickly, but I saw him wipe his face. Later that afternoon, I stood in the doorway of the workshop watching David sand a piece of oak. Thomas was at his desk in the office reviewing a case. James was in the yard chasing Sophie with a stick. Catherine used to say that the best furniture was made from cracked wood. You take the splits, the knots, the imperfections, and you work with them. You don't hide them, you make them part of the strength. My son wasn't perfect. He'd lied, stolen, and nearly destroyed me. But he was here, working, trying. Thomas had come back into my life after 30 years because I'd given him a chance when no one else would. Maybe that's what family is. Not the people you're born with, but the people who show up, who do the work, who earn their place at the table, and who, when they break, you have the courage to pick up the pieces and start building again. James ran up to the workshop, breathless and grinning, carrying a tray with 3 cups of lemonade. The Grandpa Bill, Dad, Uncle David, the 3 of us stopped working. David set down his sander. Thomas closed his laptop. I wiped the sawdust from my hands. We each took a cup. The morning sun streamed through the open door, catching the sawdust in the air like gold. Somewhere in the yard, Sophie laughed. The smell of fresh-cut wood filled the shop. Tools hung neatly on the wall. A half-finished table sat on the workbench. Family built by hand. Looking back at everything that happened, I realized how close I came to losing, not just my life, but my soul. This family betrayal wasn't just about money or property. It was about trust, shattered love, weaponized, and the devastating realization that the people you die for might be the ones trying to bury you. If you're listening to this family story, here's what I learned: don't be like me. Don't wait until you're lying in a hospital bed alone and forgotten to see the truth. Don't excuse cruelty as family loyalty. Don't mistake enabling for love. My wife Catherine carried guilt for 22 years because she thought protecting our son from consequences was kindness. It wasn't. It was cowardice. And I repeated her mistake, ignoring red flags, making excuses, hoping love would fix what only accountability could heal. The greatest lesson from this family story is this family betrayal doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it says, I love you, while switching your medication. Sometimes it signs your name on documents while you're drugged and helpless. Trust but verify. Love but protect yourself. Forgive but never at the expense of your safety or dignity. God teaches us to forgive 70 times 7, and I believe that. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean handing someone a knife after they have already stabbed you. True forgiveness requires the other person to show through actions, not words, that they have changed. My son didn't deserve my trust because he cried or apologized. He earned it back one nail at a time, rebuilding the workshop his wife burned down. Here's my advice: if you're in a family story that feels wrong, that makes you question your own reality, that leaves you isolated and afraid, get help. Talk to someone outside the family. Document everything. Protect your assets. Don't assume blood means loyalty. Some of the most dangerous people in the world are the ones who know exactly where you're vulnerable because you trusted them enough to show them. And if you're the one who's betrayed someone, if you're reading this and recognizing yourself in David or Jessica, stop right now. The path you're on ends in prison isolation and a lifetime of regret. Family betrayal destroys everyone it touches, including the betrayer. Choose accountability. Choose honesty. Choose the hard work of rebuilding trust instead of the easy destruction of taking advantage. Catherine was right about one thing. The best things are built from broken pieces. My son and I will never have the relationship I once imagined. But what we're building now, founded on honesty, work, and consequences, is stronger than what we had before. It's real, and maybe that's enough. Family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up, who does the work, who picks up the pieces when everything falls apart and helps you build something better. Thank you for walking with me through this journey to the end. I'd love to hear your perspective. Drop a comment below, sharing what you would do if you found yourself in a situation like Bill's caught between betrayal and forgiveness. Your thoughts mean everything to me. If this narrative resonated with you emotionally, please consider subscribing so you won't miss future stories. A quick note: while inspired by real-life themes and social issues surrounding elder abuse and family conflict, certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. If this content doesn't align with your preferences, feel free to explore other videos that might suit you better.